All right. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hopefully everybody had a great Memorial Day weekend. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's training webinar. This is Sean from our Flux support team here. And today we are going to be covering the Letters and Liquid training webinar on how to master the liquid code within Flux. So today, this is going to be a highly technical webinar reviewing the basics up to the advanced parts of the liquid code editor and how it works in Flux. So as always, if you should have any questions at any time during the session, please jot those down in the questions section. We'll be saving the last few minutes to address these questions, but feel free to enter them into that section as you think of them. So let's go ahead and get started. So in today's Letters and Liquid Code webinar, we'll be going over liquid code and where liquid lives, coding and your letter templates, the building blocks for liquid, if-then logic, and for loops, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end. All right, so before we get into the actual overview, let's take a look at the definition of liquid code. As you can see on the screen, liquid is a markup language. It uses a combination of HTML, CSS, tags, objects, and filters to load dynamic content. They are used inside a liquid template file. All right, now that we know what liquid is, let's go into where you can see liquid code in action. So liquid exists just about everywhere in Flux systems, whether it's in the list view, the headers, any guidance text, auto emails, and the most obvious being templates that are generated in Flux. While we have the word add-in, Excel, and ad hoc, Liquid stands on its own amongst these tools as a solid method to pull data in a way that can be highly stylized, in-depth, and in mass. So now that we know that Liquid is used pretty much everywhere on your Flux site, list views, letters, emails, etc., let's take a look at some suggested practices when writing them. So one of the best practices that we use here in Flux internally is using text editors, various different software when writing or editing your liquid. Some examples on the screen for text editor software. And it may seem a little off to suggest that something that's not Flux we're suggesting you use, but in this, this is a guidance presentation. And these tools are highly recommended for working on letters, liquid text, and other liquid items. So the core reasoning behind using external programs isn't a weakness of Flux. It's more that these software options are specifically intended to help gain better visibility and organization for coding letters. These are used by web developers and developers, including Flux staff, so they can have more screen real estate to concentrate on their work. All right, we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of the building blocks for Liquid. So some common tags. I want to talk a little bit about the core elements of Liquid. Keeping in mind, when I say Liquid, I really mean HTML here. On the right, you'll see a small example of some of my letter code. This breaks down the use of some of the items. The first being break tags, which are really just carriage returns in HTML. Following those are header tags, which will most likely be used to vary the size of your text. These are useful for headers and groups or calling out titles. The next one is paragraph tags. They have a special place, the trash. Below that, we have strong tags, underlying tags, and emphasis tags or italics. Those are standard fare for text. You all probably know what these do, but this is what they look like in practice, and you can see to the right. So this is the same code from the last slide, but a little clearer. The left is the code in my text editor, and the right is the end result. Notice that each of them have an opening tag and a closing tag. Anything inside the opening tag is going to be changed. It's absolutely important to have a close tag. This will be important going forward for the more complex items, and not having them could be very catastrophic. So I mentioned the paragraph tags a few slides back, but I can say that we don't use them that often ourselves. I suggest this mostly because if you wanted to ever take a template, export it to a PDF, and maybe move that over to Word, it would come out very weird. So pro tip, try to avoid using the paragraph tags. Divs or breaks are going to be better served to use instead of paragraphs. So moving along into some if-then logic. We'll be going over how to optimize your Liquid code using conditional statements. So conditional statements, let's start with those. The more you delve into the world of Liquid, you may encounter someone like me telling you conditions this, loops that. These are key elements to fully utilize Liquid and extracting data from a Flux system. I've compiled here a list of items that you'll see in the slides going forward, which I'll explain in more detail. But these are a few examples of what you can expect to see in a lot of letters and Liquid text. If and unless statements are the bread and butter of conditions in Liquid. They're used in list views, headers, and just about every Liquid letter at some point or another. What is important to note about if and unless statements is they serve almost the same purpose, but they approach from different directions. For example, if statements are if this, if that, if this or that, if this and that. It's inclusive and exclusive. Unless statements are almost always exclusive. You're trying to prevent data from coming through. We've used this a lot for hiding internal reports from letters. In addition to being able to include and exclude data, these can be utilized with other conditions, such as for loops, to get really specific about what data you're getting. Hiding payments that aren't paid is probably one of the most common examples of utilizing these together. All right, so let's put them to use. For this segment, I'm going to show you this in Flux. The reason is that it's more because the code I use here is based on a model theme, and I want to show you how these differ. So in my Flux instance, I'll show you two themes and how one shows data and one does not. This is a good example of displaying data based on a condition. This is extremely useful and is an aspect of Liquid that's used in just about every system of Flux today. I want you to take a look at line 11, as that starts our if statement. And then the line 17 is the end if. On the left is an if statement to show specific data. I wanted to show specific new row for a table, but I only want to show when the model theme is a specific one. This would be useful for showing specific guidance text based on the theme. As you can see, 6582 doesn't show the middle content, but 1340 shows information as planned. I said if statements were the bread and butter. It's not just because that they're good at determining when data displays or not, but they're also good for displaying text. What's important about this example is that I'm not teaching you just fanciful ways to display data, but also other ways to display what you want to display when you want it to. Text is included in that. So today, right now, we're going to go over another example that adds an extra layer of complexity to the game. The else if and the else statements. On the right, I have an example for displaying text. Note there's a start and an end. There's also several extra statements inside. If this, show text. If that, show text. This format allows you to have specific parameters in which you display data. The else statement at the end is for when all other statements cannot be true or are not true. Display this text. The most common use for this type of statement is the amount requested versus amount recommended. If amount recommended is filled in, show it. If not, show the amount requested. So now, where can we use this? I wanted to show you an example of an if statement being used in our system. This is probably the most commonly used if statement. It exists in just about every instance of Flux that's live right now. In it, it's basically saying that if amount recommended, show. Otherwise, show amount requested. I used an else statement here, which adds that extra complexity to if statements, which is going to be covered here in a moment. All right, so now let's look at the for loop. For loops, these would be the most powerful tool, but they have the potential to be the hardest tool to master. What makes them unique is that they are essentially a cross-card filter. They're often used when you're jumping to another card to pull data. This is the only way to pull data when dealing with the concept of the one-to-many. Payments, reports, amendments, dynamic cards, geocodes, where there could be millions, a for loop could display that data. To add to for loops is the ability to use them with if statements and unless statements. This makes it possible to accomplish displaying data such as org histories and breaking them down between requests, grants, and declined records. So I put this example in here because I knew some people would really like to know it. It's a for loop that goes through all existing geocodes on a request. This is a good example of for loops. Notice the difference between the code and the example. It only has 2 data points, but in the example, there's 3 sets of data points. That means there's 3 geocodes on this grant request, and it's going through all of them to display the data. All right, well, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for the overview portion of today's webinar. So we'll take a look at some questions here and see what we have. So we have a question here saying, I'm having a hard time entering liquid in the text editor. It seems like every time I hit return, the call stops working. But I need to be able to enter the liquid lower in my template. You know, that is a common issue as you're learning the different tools. But when entering liquid, we would suggest entering the raw view by clicking the raw button on the top right of the text editor. You'll need to use break tags to move your liquid code lower on the template. But by using the raw view, you'll be able to accurately see your code. Let's see, great question here. Let's see what we have. I have a question here saying, how do I know what field to use when writing liquid code? You know, that's another great question because there's so many different type of fields, be it core or dynamic. We always suggest using the Flux glossary. That's available in your live report section. This will show you every field along with its backend name and its label. That should help bring you closer to getting the right field first try. All right, so let's take another question we have is it possible for you to provide a list or guide sheet of the most commonly used liquid statements in Flux? That's a great question. We can definitely do that. The best first step is to visit our suggestion box on our community site and request this. That way we can create this content and host this as a webinar and send it out as the slides to you as well. Let's see here, a lot of great questions so far. We'll keep kicking through some. All right, so another question here is I want to look at those examples a bit closer so they can practice. Will the slides be available? Yes, the recording of our webinars will always be up on our knowledge base. But if you would like to have the images of these examples, check out our Ignite 2017 Grantmaker Summit in the community site as we're posting the presentations there. And again, all of our recordings of these webinars are available in our knowledge base to access and go through at your own leisure. But really wanted to kind of put the focus again on the suggestion link within the community site for the topics. You know, the more specific of what your ask is, the better geared we'll be to provide you the relevant content. And we are building our webinars based on the feedback that we hear. So continue providing that, that'd be great. All right, I think that's gonna be the last question for today. Hopefully we were able to get to all your questions. For anyone we missed, go ahead and contact us at support and we'll be happy to answer your question. But let's go ahead and wrap this up. And we'll wrap it up with something we're doing a little bit different with webinars now. We're gonna go over what we believe are the key takeaways. So hopefully we've all learned and understand that Liquid is a very powerful tool. Liquid could be very powerful, but it also is difficult to master. Practice does make perfect. And getting something to display is a key takeaway. Sometimes it may not be what you want, but it will help you get there. So focus first on, as you're learning it, just getting something to display. And then Liquid has the potential to show things that no other tools can do, such as dynamic card data. All right, so again, to learn more and access the video recording of this webinar, please check out our knowledge base at flux.zendesk.com. You'll be able to find a list of our upcoming webinars, links to register to future webinars, and all the recordings of our past webinars under training webinars. And then again, check out the community sites for updates from our webinar team here, and go ahead and submit any suggestions, such as if you want to learn how to make specific Liquid calls, building tables, that kind of questions, those are best served to let us know there, and we'll be happy to create that content for you. And of course, you can always feel free to reach out to us in support. We'd be happy to help. So thanks again for everybody joining us today. I really hope to host you again at our next training. Everybody have a great short rest of your week.